This happened on the 30th of December, 2013, during the hours of 2:30 a.m. and 4 a.m. I would like to stress that what I express in this story is not of imagination or of games, but something evil and mysterious myself and two friends had encountered. I would like to note that we were under the influence of weed, however, nowhere near the point in which it would affect our ability to tell reality from fiction. Not to mention, I have been smoking for years, so I could handle myself. Anyway, it was a fairly quiet and dark night. I and two friends, we'll call them M and C, had been planning on going out to let off some fireworks near a park near C's house. I would like to stress that C lives right in front of a very mysterious open and endless forest just behind a residential area. We had entered the forest numerous times before. Out of all the mysterious and unquestionable evil experiences we had shared there, this was the one that made us want to seek out what I've been seeing, hearing, and feeling. Following this experience, we have encountered many weird and unknown things from this forest. From two mysterious brightening little red dot meters in front of us disappearing and appearing constantly, to the sound of footsteps being distorted all around us, and also unknown carving-like images in trees, although none quite as blatant and direct as what we saw that morning. We had all decided to head down to the park as we were eager to finally let off the fireworks. As we initially started walking down, say about 100 meters from the entrance, I could see a sudden change in facial expression on C. When confronted, he would deny feeling worried or anything, and would keep stressing that he was keen to see the fireworks. We approached the entrance when I noticed that both C and M had mysteriously gone quiet. Nothing was said, and we entered the forest. As we were walking, we noticed that bats had constantly been trying to swoop at us, and it was as if there was a never-ending amount of them. We decided to have a quick stop for a cigarette, and me and C sat down on a log. The one thing that still brings goosebumps down my spine is the fact that someone as loud and cheerful as M had not spoken a word, and instead of sitting down with us, turned his back to us and just kept looking out into the bushes and trees as if he was observing something. When I asked what was wrong, he simply replied that we needed to take a piss, and I dismissed it as anything out of the normal. This is when things turned very eerie. We all decided to hurry up and get out of the woods and to the park as soon as possible, as we all started to get a very weird feeling, a feeling as if we were being watched by something or someone that really did not appreciate our presence. The next part of the path we took is somewhat of a sharp and blind bend in which you were not able to see anything past it until you were actually on it. I and C had been in front the whole time, and M a few meters behind us, still very quiet. It was when we had just stepped foot on the blind path that we saw it. It began at the very corner of my eye. A blinding, bright light appeared which lasted a split second, as if it was diminishing. The face and outline of something or someone appeared merely a meter in front of us. At this moment, not one word was said. Instead, all three of us were frozen in shock. I suddenly had the urge to run as far away from this thing and not look back. The second I started running, C and them followed. Now, I would just like to note that I am a religious person, and that throughout this experience the Lord's Prayer was constantly playing back in my mind, although this was not intentional. It was as if my own mind was doing it without even me noticing. We had finally gotten to the entrance. Throughout what seemed to be a merely 5-minute sprint, the whole way back endlessly and endlessly, the amounts of bats were constantly following us and swooping right behind us. It was when we exited, and all tried to regain our thoughts and breath, that I saw the absolute look of fear on C and M's face. I'm not denying that I hadn't just gone through one of the most terrifying experiences in my life, but the look I seen on specifically C's face was something I could not explain with words. We all finally decided to walk away from the forest along the outskirts path and find a suitable quick area we could let off the fireworks and go back home. These next experiences are what solidified to us that what we saw was no mere illusion. Something was following us and wanted us far away from there. After 10 or so minutes following the path, we found a spot. As I was walking down towards it, I felt a sudden pull as if something was making or wanting me to follow the direction into the woods. This was quickly dismissed and ignored. This is our last mysterious experience of the night before we decide to leave. As I and M were sitting down ready to light the fireworks, we noticed C standing near a meter or so behind us. We asked what was wrong with him, and he said these very words: "I can sense the fear," in a voice which I had never heard C use before. And after a minute of questioning C what the hell he was on about, we heard one of the scariest sounds or screeches I have ever heard in my life. The sound is embedded. This was no normal creature sound. In fact, there was absolutely nothing behind us, as we were in an illuminated area and had clear vision all around us. The sound of a grunt, an angry growl, and a loud and irregular breathing patterns could be heard all around us. Quite frankly, I'll cut the bullshit. It sounded like a demon. It was from then we all had enough and rushed back home. None of us have been able to get our heads around this experience. Back home, he said that he felt a genuine presence of evil, and that when we were standing up, when he had been sitting down, he had seen a large black figure in the distance. We stayed up the whole remainder of the morning, trying to figure out what it was, when ultimately, it was denounced as an evil mystery. This is something that recently had happened to me a few weeks ago. I have more encounters while hunting, but I will share those another time if this goes all right. They're a bit longer and more strange. I am from Southwest Georgia and live right on the Georgia-Alabama line. I was riding dirt roads one night with my friend and her younger sister. We were fishing earlier that evening and didn't have any luck, so we decided to get some beer and go for a ride. On into the night, after riding dirt roads in between Lumpkin and Georgetown, we went to a spot I know pretty well. That was a swamp, off the side of the dirt road. So we get out and decide to chill for a little while. About 30 minutes pass and I decide to walk down a little ways into the water and cast out my pole with some stank bait on it. My friend is behind me, standing beside the truck with their sister in the back seat. And for a few minutes, no one is talking and no music is playing. Then, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, my friend screams, and not just a scream, but a horror movie type bloody murder scream. Like it scares the living shit out of me, and I think someone just died type of scream. I go from complete and relaxing silence in the middle of a swamp in Georgia to a scream. It'll scare you and I don't care who you are. So I turn around and I yell, "What's wrong?" And as soon as I said that, something ran past me into the water. Keep in mind it is completely dark and my spotlight is in the truck. This thing, I don't know what it was, ran by me on 2 legs. It did not make one sound until it hit the water. It goes off into the water and it sounded heavy, and then all of a sudden, nothing. As if a figure flew away, as silly as it may sound, or it went underwater. Because the noise stopped out in the middle of the swamp. It was moving so fast, if it would have hit the woods, I feel like I would have heard something compared to it running on the clay. Now, all of this happened within a time frame of like 3 to 7 seconds. But, in my mind, this was all slow motion. I walked up to my friend and her little sister jumps out of my truck and is standing beside me. I asked what the hell happened, and they have no idea. But my friend said she looked over from her phone and saw something standing beside her, and she never heard a single thing walk up to her. Her little sister was on the other side of the back seat, and when she looked out the window, she said she saw a gray ear, but didn't say anything because she thought I was playing a joke or something on them. Putting the two together, the creature stood beside my friend and never made a sound for about 5 minutes until she screamed. All 3 of us confirmed it was on 2 legs. I've hunted here my whole life. It wasn't a deer for obvious reasons, It wasn't a coyote because it was too short. It was a dahog. It wasn't a deer. So, what could it have been? It obviously wasn't a small animal like a raccoon or opossum. We don't have bears in South Georgia either. So I can honestly say, and even after asking people's opinions, from my 25 years of being on this earth, I have no idea what walked up on us that night in the woods. I'll start by telling you a few things about me. I'm 18 years old and live in northern Canada in 2 different homes. One is with my father, who lives right in the middle of 222 acres of woods. We've got but a single neighbor, who is situated about a kilometer away. My second home is with my mother. She lives on the edge of a city, close to the woods and the main shopping center. The story is split into 3 parts, and believe me, it may sound crazy, but I swear, all of this is true. The first part of the story starts at my father's house. I'd often go for walks in the woods. It was peaceful and quiet. I'd always bring my 3 dogs for protection, a German Shepherd and 2 Australian Shepherds. Nothing ever happened in the woods. There was the occasional sighting of bears, and we found quite a few lynx tracks, but nothing out of the ordinary. Until something started watching me from the woods. A black figure of sorts. And at first, I thought it was just my paranoid mind playing tricks on me, so I shrugged it off. A few days passed since I first felt the strange watching presence. It was a cold day out. The sun was gone and the wind came from the north, making it even colder. It was around noon, and it was time for me to bring the dogs out for a walk. I brought them down to the road that leads to my house. Nobody was around and it was silent all over, except for the wind blowing through the tree leaves. I was calm, but then it felt like I was being followed. Of course, my dogs were following me, but this feeling was dark. I continued. It eventually turned back to go home. Everyone was gone, so I arrived to an empty house. As I was about to bring the dogs into their kennel, I noticed one of the Aussies was frozen in place. He was staring into the woods. I tried to get his attention, but he would not budge. I walked over to him, pat his head. He only growled, but not to me. He growled to whatever was in the woods. The dog was pacing, tail tucked between his legs and ears held back. That made me feel a little uneasy, since I had been feeling watched or followed during the walk. It also meant I wasn't the only one who felt it. I decided to be safe and locked the door when I was inside. I'd like to say this feeling left after a while, but no. It only became more frequent. I had to lock and cover my windows at night because it felt as though someone was peering through them. I told people about it, especially those I lived with. They'd tell me it was a bear or maybe some ghost. A few even mentioned that it could be a stalker. I knew it was neither of these things. It just didn't feel right. Fast forward to about 3 months after the first occurrence. It's September, and the weather has begun to get colder. I was outside with my dogs cleaning some skulls I had recently gotten from a trapper. I was just minding my own business. All of my family members were gone, so I was left alone again. Then, I went near the forest and felt the dark presence again. It was so strange. I just couldn't shake it off as nothing. Scared, I went inside and decided to make myself some food in the comfort of my home. The fear left, and I felt safe again, until I heard the dreadful sound coming from the woods outside. It sounded like a man screaming, a deer howling in pain, and the low growl of a bear, all at once. It was the scariest thing I've ever heard in my life. I checked all the doors and ran to the second story of the house to hide. I'm not sure why I felt so much fear, since I heard nothing after that, but I called a relative, and they told me I was just hearing things. That night, I could barely sleep. I was afraid of whatever this thing was going to come inside. I kept seeing things in the shadows of the trees. After this incident, It was hard to ignore. Eventually, I went to live with my mother in the city. I was there for a better chance at a job. I also had some friends to reunite with there. Once I moved, I met up with my childhood best friend. She and I decided to take a long walk in the chilly temperatures of the night. We talked and talked. Nothing happened until about 11:30. We were crossing the street when I heard the same exact sound, but much louder, coming from the woods down the road. I was terrified. My friend, though, paid no attention to it. We continued walking, but I was a little more paranoid than before, just waiting for something to jump out after me. An hour passed and we had to split ways. She went home and I did too. I had some instrumental music playing on my phone to keep me calm. Well, obviously, that didn't last long. Of course, something had to happen in the dead of night while I was alone. As I walked in the streets, I heard a baby scream, but it didn't sound normal. It was a horrifying, distorted scream. I looked in the direction of the sound and thought I saw someone there. My feet moved faster than before, trying to get me home. Then I heard another scream, much scarier than the first. I ran for it. That might not have been the best decision, but it was instinctive. Suddenly, I heard feet hitting the pavement. It felt like something or someone was chasing me. I looked back quickly and thought I saw a large black figure coming, but it only lasted several seconds till I saw nothing. The shouts and screams did not stop, though. I finally got home, but I realized the door was locked and couldn't get inside. Unfortunately, those screams continued. After many calls and pressing the doorbell, my stepfather opened the door. I was a hyperventilating mess, but I got through it. I'm very spiritual, and I've been told by many mediums or spiritual leaders that I am a beacon for bad spirits. I assumed that it was a bad spirit, but I remember reading about wendigos, a creature that is apparently connected to me in some ways that are unknown to me. I did research again and deeply believe that whatever followed me is still watching me. I'm not sure if it's a wendigo, but it could be. Some acquaintances agree that it is quite possible. Now I'm just waiting for my next encounter with it, and I'm left wondering, what does it want, and what will it do next? When I bought this property a couple of years ago, one of the main selling points was the woods. Between the house and the road are rows and rows of red pine, roughly 5 acres and standing maybe 35 to 40 feet tall. Walking through these woods gives off an eerie feeling, but enjoyable still. The ground covered by many thick needles giving off a spring step when trekking through. Behind the home are more of a wild side landscape with many different trees, a creek, and a winding path that's just wide enough for a small utility vehicle. These woods, the kids and I enjoyed most. We have done a few projects, such as build a small wooden bridge to get to the other side of the creek. We made a rope swing, and they all have their own battery-operated vehicles to drive the path if they wanted to. One thing we did do last year, looking back, is we found a huge pile of rocks in the middle of nowhere. The rocks varied in size from a handful to a little over a bowling ball size. Well, we were pulling rocks off that pile, as if there was something buried inside. We never found anything other than more rocks. The pile of rocks may be 10 feet long, 8 feet wide, and maybe 3 feet tall. We dug down deep enough to see the rocks that were buried in the ground, so we stopped. I am thinking now that maybe it wasn't such a good idea. In recent past, our family had dealt with something I thought would never happen, and that was a ghost or ghosts in our home. The first story, written, explains the details in that, but this happened in my home. I and my wife talked about this with friends and family, but nobody else after that. I live in a small city. In talking with them, stories of this property began slowly coming out of the woodwork. The following stories below are accounts from what we heard happening in these woods. My wife spoke to her sister and her sister's husband. Her husband recalls 3 stories of the previous owner's experience. 2 of them, he claims he can't remember. but I am taking it as either he's making it up to scare us or he just refuses to tell. The one experience he did say was the man that lived there chose to never take trees from the woods. The main source of heating for the house is a wood stove. He never hunted these woods either. I spoke to a friend of mine, who we will call Bert's, about the haunted house incident. Bert has been hunting in the woods behind this property for many years and decided to tell me of his experiences, of what has happened to him and many hunters, including his young nephew now. Going out in the early hours before sunrise, everyone seems to see a silhouette of a man walking around, and when approached, he disappears. Other accounts are there is a light they see about the side of a credit card flying around, and that too often, when approached, disappears. The one event that kind of sent chills up his spine was one morning. He was up in a tree, all set up and waiting as hunters do. He saw a light down below the bottom of the tree just sitting there. So he called out and asked who it was. He got no answer. He became angry that this person was messing with his hunting site, so he began to threaten him or her. The light stayed right at the bottom. So Bert climbed down, and as he climbed down, he saw the light move away. He said he chased this light a good 40 yards or so. Then, it just disappeared. He says he remembers standing there in a thick fog, and all of a sudden, debris from up above the tree, such as leaves, twigs, and other things, came falling down upon him. As he looked up, this huge gust of wind, strong enough to almost knock him down, came rushing in. He says he doesn't hunt alone anymore. Another friend, who is a volunteer for the fire department, told me they were called out there about a fire about 6 years ago. Apparently, half of those houses caught on fire, but luckily no one was hurt or in the home at the time of the fire. He said it was strange because they could not find the source of the fire. He said that while they were there, he saw someone standing just inside the yard by the woods for a glimpse, and when he turned to catch up with them, there was no one there. He said he had an eerie feeling about the woods. He told his supervisor about it, but they never believed him. They thought maybe it was just some kind of smoke inhalation or something causing him to see that. Okay, these are the stories I've heard during my time. I have not had any experiences myself in these woods, nor my kids. But recently an event has happened with someone I know from work. I have had some raccoon problems in the last few weeks as well. We have, or should I say, have 6 chickens. In 2 evenings, we had lost 2 to the raccoons. We know they are raccoons because we saw them from the 2nd floor looking out the window in the evening. A coworker of mine, who we will call Billy, overheard me telling another about losing my chickens, and he had offered his services to come out and exterminate them. Awesome. We agreed for him to come out on a Saturday evening, and he and his friends would come out and camp out for a couple of hours around the chicken coop late at night to pick off them as they came. Around 8:30 in the morning, they pulled into the driveway, got their gear, and decided to change plan. Because the layout of the property and woods, they first were going to check the abandoned camper, then patrol the pines, then patrol the woods in the back. Within 10 minutes, I received a text from him saying they got a huge one in the camper, and we're now going to patrol the pines. I replied with great job guys, but be careful in the pines. There are a couple of deep bunkers with the pines, and you don't want to trip on them because you could get really hurt. About 15 minutes later, I walked out on the deck from the 2nd floor and saw them coming back. I asked how it went, and they told me they thought they better come back to the house. What had happened was that they walked deep within looking up the pines to pick them out of the trees, and they heard branches and needles crunching from what they thought was a coyote. They looked down in the snow, and they had seen some tracks. The noises grew, and it seemed like there were more than one now. They felt that they were being circled. Worried that they stumbled upon a den, they hightailed it back to the house. They said they were going to walk into the backwoods now. I thought maybe this wasn't a good idea, so I tried to talk them out of it. I told them I had heard stories of those woods in the dark. Their reply was that they have dealt with scary things in the woods before, and that they would be fine. And okay then, and good luck on your journey, and I shall see you on the other side, I told them, and I went back inside. About 10 minutes later, I received a text, "We are leaving." I walked outside to catch up with them before they left for the night. Before they walked down the woods, I saw two young men with their firearms, confident and all rambled up for the extermination. When I saw them on the return, they were 3 shades whiter, eyes wide open, and they were talking so fast that I had to ask them to slow down. One of them just put his guns away and got right into the truck. Billy explained to me what had happened. They walked down the path, and while walking, they felt they were being watched. They heard a big crack of a branch on the ground behind them. They quickly turned around and flashed their spotlight and saw nothing. No noise of an animal running away, no broken branches, just nothing. They continued down the path, and about midway, Billy saw what had looked like a glowing white blob, he says, roughly about 5 feet tall and hovering. They flashed a light on it, and it looked like it moved so fast it was a blur and disappeared. Talking to each other, asking if they saw it, and just then the branches and twigs crunched behind them. The other saw it again, and as they flashed the light, again it disappeared. This happened 2 more times, each time appearing to get closer and closer. It was messing with them, appearing behind them. This was when I received the text, and they ran back to the house. Billy told this story to many coworkers at my place of employment, and of course he got a hard time for it. No one believes his story nor mine of the house, and that's okay. There are now 3 guys at work who are planning on walking the woods to debunk his story. I am unsure if this is a good idea or not, but I am leaning towards letting them. Yesterday, I had told a friend online about what's going on in the woods. She told me it may sound crazy, but she may have an idea what it is. She is into fae lore. She told me it sounds like a dark fairy. She doesn't remember the name, but she's thinking it's a Morrow fairy. She says that this fairy, which can be 5 foot tall, I guess, walks the woods and eats bones. Bones from animals, of course, that have been killed. She says they protect their woods from their stash. They normally don't harm humans, but are known to play and chase. A way to test it would to be bringing a chicken bone, throw it away into a circle, and see if it's gone the next day. I am leaning more of a ghost than a fairy, but what do I know? My life in the rural Midwest has always been pretty mundane. I've always enjoyed being in and around the woods, hills, and rivers. Most of the friends I have today, many years later, are thanks to that. We all have lots of stories, but one sticks out above all others. A friend and I had set up camp in the woods along the Illinois River, many miles from the nearest town, which had maybe 1,000 people in it. We sat by the fire, tucking on a bottle of lemonade, vodka, and laughing, and attempting to catch and release small catfish while preparing to sleep, because we had planned to leave early the following morning. Eventually, we hear the inevitable sounds of branches and slow crunching footsteps. We joke about it, and remember a story passed around by the locals about a high school teacher who was approached by a panther while in the woods taking samples for her upcoming class. However, this particular part of Illinois is too north to see mountain lions or similar large cats, so we didn't worry much about it. The time comes for us to call it a night. We bucket some water on the fire and head into the shelter. Only a few moments pass before we hear it. A rumbling noise, similar to a growling. It isn't necessarily feline, but it's obviously very close and somewhat terrifying. Eventually, we devised a plan. Stay together, exit the shelter with our sleeping bags spread out around our upper bodies to appear larger than we actually were, weapons in hand. We shine all of our lights around and shout and kick and throw things. Almost immediately, we watched a very large cat leap from a low branch and lower itself into the weeds. We continued to shine our lights in that direction, but didn't see any sign of it. All those sounds of something moving slowly could still be heard nearby. We decided to relight the fire and stay awake until sunup, watching and listening for any signs of it. The sounds subsided after a while, and eventually the sun began to rise. We took down our makeshift shelter, gathered our backpacks, and walked towards the nearest tree line exit before continuing our journey. We both looked back at that day, wondering if we would have died if we were not well prepared